My name's Harper, and I'm 29. Sunday dinners at Grandpa's old Ohio farmhouse always felt like home with the smell of roasted chicken filling the air and his fishing stories making me laugh. Dad was there too quieter than usual, twisting his napkin like he was nervous. I was setting the table joking with Grandpa when he smiled and asked, "How's the house on Cypress Ridge treating you?" I froze. Cypress Ridge. Dad's plate slipped shattering on the floor. His face went pale. What was he hiding? Have you ever felt a family moment turn strange like and subscribed to find out what happened next? The silence after Dad's plate hit the floor felt heavier than the farmhouse itself. I stood there gripping a stack of napkins, my heart thudding. Grandpa's brow furrowed, his fork hovering over his plate. "Harper, you don't know about Cypress Ridge?" he asked, voice soft but sharp with confusion. I shook my head, glancing at Dad. His eyes were fixed on the table, hands clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. "It's nothing," he muttered, standing to grab a broom. "Just a mix-up." I knelt to pick up the biggest shards, the porcelain cold against my fingers. My mind raced. Cypress Ridge. Why did that name tug at something buried deep? Dad swept the floor too fast, avoiding my gaze. "Sadie," my little sister piped up from her seat, oblivious. "Can we have pie now? I'm starving." Her smile was bright, but it didn't touch the knot forming in my chest. Grandpa leaned back, his chair creaking. "Raymond," he said, addressing Dad, "you told me you'd handle it." His tone wasn't angry, just disappointed, like he'd found a crack in something he trusted. Dad froze mid-sweep, his shoulders stiff. "It's not the time, Pop," he said, voice low, almost a growl. Mom reached for the mashed potatoes, forcing a laugh. "Let's eat before it gets cold," she said. But her eyes darted between Dad and me like she was bracing for something. I wanted to push, to demand what Grandpa meant, but the air felt thick, like we were all holding our breath. I carried the broken pieces to the kitchen, the clink of porcelain in my hands echoing my unease. Alone by the sink, I stared out the window at the darkening yard. The old oak tree swayed in the breeze, and for a moment, I saw myself as a kid running through fields I barely remembered. Was Cypress Ridge part of that? I rinsed my hands, the cold water grounding me. Back in the dining room, Dad was talking about his job at the hardware store, his words too loud, too quick. Sadie was nodding along, but Grandpa's eyes were on me, searching. I sat down, forcing a smile, but my fork felt heavy. "So, Grandpa?" I said, keeping my voice light. "What's this house you're talking about?" Dad coughed, nearly choking on his water. Grandpa set his glass down, slow and deliberate. "It was for you, Harper," he said. "Bought it when you were little. A place for you to grow into, to call your own." His voice was warm, but there was a weight to it, like he was handing me something fragile. I stared at him, my throat tight. A house for me. Why hadn't I ever heard of it? Dad pushed his chair back, the scrape loud against the wood floor. "It's gone okay." He snapped, his face flushed. "There's no house. Just let it go." His words hit like a slap, sharp and sudden. Sadie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide. Mom touched Dad's arm, whispering, "Ray, calm down." But he shook her off, standing to clear his plate, even though it was still full. I wanted to follow him, to demand answers, but my legs felt stuck. Grandpa reached across the table, his hand resting near mine. "I thought you knew," he said quietly, his eyes soft with regret. My chest ached like something was unraveling inside me. Dad knew about this house and never told me. What else was he keeping? Sadie broke the tension, her voice small. "Can someone explain what's going on?" I looked at her, wishing I could shield her from whatever this was. But I couldn't answer. I didn't know. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. I excused myself, saying I needed air, and stepped into the kitchen again. Through the cracked door, I heard Dad's voice, low and urgent, talking to Mom. "She doesn't need to know," he said. "It's done." Mom's reply was too soft to catch, but her tone was sharp, like she was arguing. My hands shook as I leaned against the counter. What was done? Why was Dad so desperate to bury this? The question burned, and I knew I couldn't let it go. I stood by the kitchen counter, the cool edge pressing into my palms, trying to steady my breath. Dad's whispered words to Mom echoed in my head, sharp and secretive. I couldn't just go back to the dining room and pretend everything was fine. The air outside was chilly, so I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the back door and slipped out to the porch. The night was quiet, just crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. I needed space to think. Grandpa's words about the house kept circling, a place for me to grow into. I tried to picture it, but all I could see was Dad's flushed face, his quick dismissal. My boots crunched on the gravel as I walked toward the old barn, its silhouette looming under the moonlight. I hadn't been out here in years, not since I was a kid chasing fireflies with Sadie. The memory felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I leaned against the barn door, the wood rough under my fingers. Why would Dad hide something this big? I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing in the dark, and opened a browser. Typing Cypress Ridge, Ohio felt like a shot in the dark, but I had to start somewhere. The search pulled up a real estate listing archived for a small house with a wraparound porch and a cypress tree out front. My breath caught. The photo matched a fuzzy image in my mind, like a dream I'd forgotten. The listing said the house sold 8 years ago. 8 years. I was 21, then just starting my job at the community center, scraping by in a cramped apartment. If Grandpa bought it for me, why didn't I know? My fingers hovered over the screen, itching to call Dad and demand answers, but the knot in my stomach stopped me. He'd just shut down again. Back inside the dining room was quieter now. Sadie was helping Mom clear the table, their movements stiff, like they were tiptoeing around the tension. Grandpa sat alone, staring at his coffee mug, his shoulders slumped. I slid into the chair next to him, my voice low. Grandpa, when did you buy that house? He looked up, his eyes tired but kind. When you were 10, he said. Saved every penny from my mechanic shop. Wanted you to have a place to call yours no matter what. My throat tightened. 10. That was the summer I spent weeks at Grandpa's painting birdhouses and listening to his stories about fixing old cars. I remembered him tucking me in, saying I'd always have a home. Did he mean that house? I swallowed hard, glancing at the kitchen where Dad was rinsing dishes, his back to us. Did Dad know? I asked, barely above a whisper. Grandpa nodded, his jaw tight. Told him to give you the deed when you turned 18. Thought he did. His voice cracked, and I saw the hurt in his eyes, not just for me, but for the trust he'd placed in Dad. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. It's okay, I lied, my voice shaky. But it wasn't okay. The betrayal was starting to take shape like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Sadie bounced over, holding a slice of apple pie. Harper, you gotta try this, she said, her grin too bright for the room's mood. I forced a nod, taking the plate, but the sweetness turned sour in my mouth. Mom caught my eye from the kitchen doorway, her face unreadable. You staying over? She asked, her tone careful, like she was testing the waters. No, I said, standing. I need to head back. I hugged Grandpa, his flannel shirt smelling of wood smoke and coffee, and promised to call tomorrow. As I grabbed my keys, I saw Dad watching me from the sink, his expression a mix of guilt and something else, maybe fear. I didn't say goodbye. Driving home, the highway stretched dark and endless, my mind spinning with questions. That house was real. Grandpa's dream was real. So why did Dad let it slip away? At my apartment, I sat on the couch, the listing still open on my phone. The house looked warm, inviting, like a place I could have built a life. My chest ached, not just for the loss, but for the lie. Dad knew, and he chose to keep me in the dark. I tossed my phone aside, the screen going black. Tomorrow I'd get answers, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, my apartment felt too small, the walls pressing in as I stared at the listing for the Cypress Ridge house on my phone. I couldn't sleep, the image of that porch burned into my mind. I needed answers, not just about the house, but about why Dad buried it like some shameful secret. I grabbed my keys and drove to Grandpa's, the Ohio fields, blurring past my grip tight on the steering wheel. His farmhouse was quiet, the morning sun glinting off the windows. Grandpa was in the backyard pruning his rose bushes, his hands steady despite his age. I sat on the porch steps, watching him clip a wilted bloom. Grandpa. I started my voice quieter than I meant. Tell me about the house. Everything. He set the shears down, wiping his brow, and settled beside me. His eyes were heavy like he'd been carrying this for years. It was a promise, he said, voice low. When your grandma passed, I wanted to give you something solid, something she'd have wanted for you. A 2-bedroom place, white picket fence, a big cypress out front. Bought it outright in 2004. Put it in your name. He paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the step. I gave your dad the deed to hold on to. Told him to give it to you when you were ready. My stomach twisted. 2004. I was 10, spending summers here, oblivious. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice catching. Grandpa sighed, his gaze distant. You were a kid, Harper. I trusted Ray to handle it. He said he'd tell you when you turned 18. He looked at me, his eyes searching. He didn't, did he? I shook my head, the ache in my chest sharpening. Dad didn't just forget. He chose to keep it from me. I stood pacing the porch, my boots scuffing the worn boards. What happened to it? I pressed. Grandpa's face hardened. I don't know the details. Ray said it was sold years back. Never explained why. Sold. The word hit like a stone. I pictured Dad signing papers, erasing Grandpa's dream without a word to me. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. I'm going to ask him, I said, more to myself than Grandpa. He nodded, but his expression was pained, like he knew this would tear something open. I drove to Dad's hardware store, my pulse racing. The bell jingled as I walked in, the smell of sawdust and metal filling the air. Dad was behind the counter, ringing up a customer, his smile forced. When he saw me, his face tightened. Harper, he said, nodding like I was just another customer. I waited until the store emptied, my heart pounding. Dad, we need to talk, I said, leaning against the counter. He busied himself with a stack of receipts, not meeting my eyes. Busy day, he muttered. Can it wait? My jaw clenched. No, it's about the house. Cypress Ridge. Grandpa told me everything. His hands stilled the receipts, crumpling slightly. There's nothing to say. He snapped, his voice sharper than I expected. It's gone. Let it go. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. Gone. You sold it, didn't you? A house Grandpa bought for me. Why? He looked up, his eyes flashing with something like anger, but underneath I saw fear. You don't understand, he said, turning away. It wasn't that simple. I grabbed his arm, not hard, but enough to make him stop. Then explain it, I said, my voice shaking. Because right now, it feels like you stole something from me. He pulled away, his face red. You think I wanted this? I did what I had to. His words were clipped like he was holding back a flood. The bell jingled as a customer walked in, breaking the moment. Dad turned to them, his smile back, but it didn't reach his eyes. I stood there, my chest tight, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. What had he done? And why couldn't he just tell me? I left the hardware store, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. Dad's words. I did what I had to, burned in my mind, sharp and vague all at once. The streets of Columbus blurred past the late morning sun, too bright for the weight in my chest. I couldn't go home, not with this anger clawing at me. My phone buzzed, a text from Lucas, my cousin, who I hadn't seen in months. Heard you're asking about the house. I know some stuff. Meet me at Rosie's Diner noon. Rosie's was a small place across town, all chrome and red vinyl booths, the kind of spot Dad used to take me for milkshakes when I was a kid. I slid into a booth, the smell of frying bacon mixing with my unease. Lucas walked in, his ball cap low, looking older than I remembered, his jaw tight. He sat across from me, skipping small talk. You want the truth about Cypress Ridge? He asked, voice low. I nodded, my throat dry. What do you know? He leaned forward, glancing around like someone might overhear. Your dad sold it in 2017, he said. Not because he wanted to. He was in deep, Harper. Gambling, bad bets, bad people. He needed cash fast. My stomach dropped like the floor had vanished. Gambling dad. The man who lectured me about saving every penny. You're lying, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Lucas shook his head, pulling out his phone. He showed me an old email from a real estate agent confirming the sale addressed to Dad. He told me bits and pieces, Lucas said. Swore me to secrecy. Said it was to protect you and Sadie. Protect us. I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a choke. All those years I thought Dad was steady, reliable. Now he felt like a ghost I didn't know. I stared at the table, the checkered pattern blurring as my eyes stung. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, more to myself than Lucas. He shrugged, his voice softening. Shame, probably. He didn't want you to see him like that. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Shame. He let Grandpa's dream for me vanish because of his mistakes, and I was supposed to feel sorry for him. The waitress came by refilling my coffee, but I barely noticed. Lucas leaned back, his eyes steady. There's more, he said. He owed money to some rough guys. Selling the house got him out, but it wasn't enough. He's still paying it off Harper. That's why he's always at the store working late. My chest tightened, each word sinking deeper like stones piling up inside me. Dad wasn't just hiding the house. He was hiding a whole life. I stood my chair, scraping loud enough to turn heads. I need to go, I said, my voice shaking. Lucas reached out, but I pulled away. Don't tell him we talked, I said, grabbing my bag. Outside, the air felt too thin, like I couldn't breathe deep enough. I drove aimlessly, the city fading into suburbs, then open fields. My phone buzzed again. Sadie this time, asking if I was okay. I didn't reply. How could I explain this? I pulled over on a quiet road, the engine ticking as it cooled. The truth was suffocating. Dad didn't just sell the house. He gambled away my future grandpa's sacrifice, everything. And he lied about it for years. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, tears hot on my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but the hurt was too raw, too heavy. What else had he kept from me? And how much more was still buried? I couldn't stay parked on that empty road forever, the weight of Lucas's words crushing me. My hands still shook as I drove to Dad's house, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the quiet suburb. His truck was in the driveway and my stomach churned. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want him to prepare some half-truth. The front door was unlocked, and I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and old books hitting me like a memory I didn't want. Dad was in the living room, slouched on the couch, a baseball game muted on the TV. He looked up, startled, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept either. Harper, he said, sitting up, his voice cautious. What's going on? I stood in the doorway, my bag still slung over my shoulder, the anger and hurt boiling over. I talked to Lucas, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He told me about the gambling, the debts, the house. His face crumpled like I'd punched him. He opened his mouth and closed it, his hands gripping the couch cushions. Harper, he started, but I cut him off. Don't. Just tell me the truth, Dad. All of it. Why did you sell Grandpa's house? Why did you lie to me for years? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. The room felt too small, the air too thick. He stood pacing to the window, his back to me. It wasn't supposed to go like this, he said, his voice low, almost broken. I got in over my head. Bad bets, bad choices. I owed people money, Harper. People who don't wait. He turned his eyes, pleading. Selling the house was the only way to keep them from coming after us. After you and Sadie. I staggered back, my bag slipping to the floor. Us, I said, my voice rising. You let Grandpa's gift, my future, go to save yourself from your mistakes. And you didn't even tell me. My chest heaved, the betrayal slicing deeper with every word. I pictured the house, that porch I'd never sit on, the cypress tree I'd never see. Gone because of him. Dad stepped closer, his hands outstretched. I was trying to protect you, he said, his voice shaking. You were starting college, building a life. I didn't want you to know I failed. Failed. The word hit me like a slap. This wasn't just about money or a house. It was about trust, about the father I thought I knew. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. You didn't fail, Dad. You lied. The front door opened and Mom walked in, her purse dangling from one hand. She froze, her eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. Dad looked at her, then back at me, his face pale. "She knows," he said, barely audible. Mom's purse hit the floor, her hand covering her mouth. "Ray," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You told her." I turned to her, my heart pounding. "You knew." I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened and she took a step back, like I'd accused her of something unforgivable. Not everything she said, her voice trembling. I knew he was in trouble, but not about the house. Her words felt like another blow, another layer of secrets piling up. The room spun, the walls closing in. Dad, Mom, the house, the lies. It was too much. I grabbed my bag, my vision blurring with tears. "I can't do this," I said, my voice barely holding together. I pushed past Mom, ignoring Dad's call after me. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay. Not with the truth tearing everything apart. I stumbled to my car, the evening air cold against my wet cheeks. My hands fumbled with the keys, the weight of Mom's stunned face and Dad's broken voice crushing me. I didn't drive far, just to a quiet park a few blocks away, where the swings creaked in the breeze. I sat on a bench, the wood damp from an earlier rain, and pulled Grandpa's letter from my bag. The paper was soft, worn from years of being folded, his handwriting neat and deliberate. I read it under the dim streetlight, each word a knife. "Harper, this house is your roots, your future. It's yours to make a life in, no matter what storms come." My chest heaved, a sob breaking free. He'd poured his heart into this, and Dad threw it away. I clutched the letter, my fingers smudging the ink. How could Dad keep this from me, from Grandpa, from everyone? My phone buzzed, a message from Sadie. "Where are you?" Mom's freaking out. I ignored it, my hands shaking too much to type. Then another text came, this one from Lucas. "Check your email. Found something else." My heart sank. More. I opened my email, my breath shallow, and saw a file from him labeled Cypress Sale Docs. I hesitated, then clicked. It was a scanned contract, the sale agreement for the house. Dad's signature was there, dated 2017, but the buyer's name stopped me cold. It wasn't a developer. It was Uncle Greg, Dad's brother. My uncle. The one who barely showed up to family dinners, always bragging about his real estate deals. The contract showed he bought it for half its value, a steal. A note scrawled in the margin read, "Family favor, keep it quiet." My blood ran cold. Dad didn't just sell the house. He handed it to Greg, knowing it was meant for me. My vision blurred, tears mixing with fury. Greg knew, they both lied. I pictured them shaking hands. Greg's smug grin, Dad's guilty silence. My phone slipped from my hand, landing in the grass. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to hold myself together, but it felt like I was shattering. Footsteps crunched behind me. I turned, expecting Sadie, but it was Mom. Her coat was unbuttoned, her face pale in the streetlight. "Harper," she said, her voice raw. "I didn't know about Greg, I swear." She sat beside me, her hands twisting together. "Your dad told me it was creditors, not family. I thought he was protecting us." Her voice broke, and for the first time I saw her not as Mom, but as someone else betrayed. I wanted to scream, to ask why she didn't push harder, why no one did. But my throat was too tight, the pain too raw. "He gave it to Greg," I whispered, my voice hollow. "Grandpa's house. My house." Mom reached for me, but I pulled back, the letter crumpling in my fist. The park was silent, the swing still. I felt like I was drowning, the truth pulling me under with no way to fight back. I sat on that park bench, Mom silent beside me, the crumpled letter from Grandpa still in my hand. The night air was sharp, biting at my knuckles, but I barely felt it. Uncle Greg's name on that contract burned in my mind, a fresh wound layered over Dad's betrayal. I couldn't just sit here drowning in hurt. I needed to do something to take back some piece of what was stolen. I stood, brushing damp grass from my jeans, my resolve hardening like steel. "I'm going to the county records office," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Mom looked up, her eyes wide. Harper, it's late. What are you looking for? I shook my head, tucking the letter into my pocket. The truth, I said. Every detail of that sale. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back, not ready for comfort. I needed answers, not hugs. The drive to the county office was a blur, the city lights streaking past. It was closed, but I found their online portal on my phone parked under a street lamp. My fingers flew across the screen, searching property records for Cypress Ridge. The sale contract Lucas sent was real, but I needed more dates, numbers, anything to understand how Dad and Greg pulled this off. I found the deed transfer confirming Greg as the buyer and a tax record showing the house's value was triple what he paid. My stomach twisted. A family favor, the note had said. Some favor. I saved the files, my hands shaking with purpose. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming what Grandpa meant for me to have. I drove to Cypress Ridge, the address etched in my mind. The house stood quiet under the moonlight, its white paint glowing, the cypress tree casting long shadows. I parked across the street, staring at the porch, where I might have sipped coffee built a life. A light was on inside, soft and warm. I knocked before I could second-guess myself. An older woman answered, her hair silver, and pulled back, her eyes kind but cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle. I took a breath, my heart pounding. "I'm Harper," I said. "This house, it was meant for me a long time ago." Her face softened and she stepped aside. "I'm Ruth. Come in." The living room smelled of lavender and old wood, cozy in a way that made my chest ache. Ruth offered me tea, but I declined, too wired to sit still. "I bought this place in 2017, she said, settling into an armchair. The seller was eager, said it was a family matter. I didn't know the details, but it felt special, like it deserved care. I nodded, my throat tight. "My grandpa bought it for me," I said. "He never got to tell me." Ruth's eyes widened and she leaned forward. "You're Arthur's granddaughter?" she asked. I froze, my breath catching. "You knew him?" She smiled, sad and warm. "He came by once after I moved in. Said he'd saved this place for someone he loved. I didn't know it was you." My eyes stung, the weight of Grandpa's dream hitting me anew. Ruth stood, motioning me to follow. "There's something you should see." She led me upstairs to a small attic with slanted ceilings. My heart raced as she pointed to a beam near the window. There, carved in the wood, were my initials, HL, scratched when I was a kid. During a summer visit I barely remembered. My fingers traced the letters, rough and real. This was mine once, and Dad gave it away. I turned to Ruth, my voice firm. "I need to know everything about that sale." Ruth's attic felt like a time capsule, the air thick with dust and memory. My fingers lingered on the carved initials HL, a piece of my childhood I'd forgotten until now. Ruth watched me, her eyes soft but curious. "I kept this place as it was," she said, gesturing to the attic's untouched beams. Felt like it held stories. I nodded, my throat tight, the weight of Grandpa's dream pressing against my ribs. But I wasn't here to dwell. I needed to act. I sat with Ruth at her kitchen table, a small lamp casting a warm glow. "Can you tell me about the sale?" I asked, my voice steady but urgent. She sipped her tea, then pulled a folder from a drawer. "The agent was pushy," she said. "Said the seller needed it done fast. I paid what I could afford, but I knew it was worth more." She slid the folder toward me, her hands trembling slightly. "This is all I have." Inside were closing documents, emails, and a handwritten note from Greg, my uncle, to the agent. "Make it quick. Family business." My jaw clenched. Greg's greed was clear, but Dad's role still gnawed at me. Why let Greg take it so cheap? I thanked Ruth, promising to stay in touch, and left with the folder, my resolve sharper than ever. The house wasn't mine anymore, but I could still reclaim the truth. Back at my apartment, I spread the documents across my coffee table, the papers crinkling under my fingers. The numbers didn't lie. Greg bought the house for pennies, flipped it to Ruth for a small profit, and left me with nothing. My phone buzzed, Sadie's name flashing. I hesitated, then answered. "Harper, where are you?" she asked, her voice small. Mom's a mess and Dad's not talking. I'm figuring it out, I said, my tone firmer than I felt. Sadie, I need you with me on this. Can you meet me tomorrow? We're talking to Dad together. She went quiet, then sighed. I don't know, Harper. This feels big. Scary. Her hesitation stung, but I pushed back. It is big. That's why we can't let it go. Please. She agreed reluctantly, her voice barely a whisper. I hung up my eyes, falling on Grandpa's letter now tucked in my bag. I pulled it out, smoothing the creases. His words about roots and storms felt like a call to action. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for what it meant for the trust Dad broke. I opened my laptop and started drafting a letter to him, my fingers flying across the keys. Dad. I wrote, I deserve the full story. Not excuses, not half-truths. I'm done waiting. Each word felt like a step forward, a reclaiming of my voice. I wrote about the house, Grandpa's sacrifice, the betrayal of him and me. My hands shook, but I kept going, pouring out the hurt, the questions, the need to understand. It wasn't just about confronting him. It was about standing up for myself, for the future I could still build. I saved the draft, my heart pounding with a quiet strength. The next morning I stood outside Dad's house, the folder in one hand, my letter printed in the other. Sadie's car pulled up, her face pale but determined. She stepped out, hugging herself against the morning chill. I'm here, she said, her voice shaky but present. I nodded, my chest tight with gratitude. We didn't speak as we walked to the door, the weight of what was coming settling between us. I knocked my knuckles firm against the wood, and as the door opened, I met Dad's eyes, my resolve unyielding. Dad opened the door, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept in days. Sadie stood beside me, her hands stuffed in her pockets, her breath visible in the morning air. I held the folder and my letter, their weight grounding me. The living room was dim, curtains still drawn, the air stale with yesterday's coffee. Dad gestured to the couch, but I stayed standing, Sadie close behind. We need to talk, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. About the house, about everything. He sank into a chair, his hands rubbing his face. I set the folder on the coffee table, the papers spilling out slightly. I found the sale records, I said. You sold Grandpa's house to Uncle Greg. For nothing. My words hung in the air, sharp but controlled. Sadie shifted her eyes on Dad, waiting. He looked at the papers, his jaw tight, then up at me. Harper. I didn't want this, he said, his voice raw. I was drowning. I slid my letter across the table. Read it, I said. He hesitated, then unfolded it, his hands trembling. His eyes scanned the pages, and I watched his face change, softening, then tightening with something like shame. Sadie peered over his shoulder, her breath catching as she read my words about Grandpa's dream, my hurt, the trust he broke. You didn't just sell it, I said, my voice steady. You gave it to Greg, knowing it was mine. Why? Dad set the letter down, his hands falling limp. Greg offered to help, he said, barely audible. I owed too much. He said he'd take the house, settle things with the guys I owed. I thought it was the only way. His voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, now small, broken. Sadie's eyes welled up, but she stayed quiet, her silence louder than words. I took a breath, my chest tight. You let him take it for pennies, I said. You let Grandpa's promise vanish. Dad's head dropped, and he nodded, a single tear hitting the table. I know, he whispered. I've hated myself for it. The admission hit me not with relief, but with a dull ache. I wanted to feel something more, anger or pity, but all I felt was hollow. Sadie spoke, her voice small. Dad, why didn't you tell us? He looked at her, his eyes red. I couldn't, he said. I didn't want you to see me like this. She stepped back, her face crumpling, and I reached for her hand, squeezing it. The room felt frozen, like we were all holding our breath, waiting for something to break. Dad stood, his movements slow, and pulled a small box from a shelf. This is all I kept, he said, handing it to me. Inside was a brass keychain shaped like a tiny house engraved with Cypress Ridge. My fingers closed around it, the metal cold against my palm. It was real, a piece of what was lost. But it wasn't enough. The truth was out, but the pain lingered heavy and unresolved like a wound that wouldn't close. I held the keychain, its edges pressing into my palm, a small cold reminder of what was gone. Dad's eyes stayed on the floor. His shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of a decade. Sadie's hand trembled in mine, her silence louder than any words. The living room felt too still, the air heavy with truths we couldn't unhear. I wanted to say something to fill the void, but my throat felt locked. I slipped the keychain into my pocket, its weight a quiet anchor. Mom stepped in from the kitchen, her footsteps soft but deliberate. She'd been listening, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. "Ray," she said, her voice low, "you told me it was just the debts. Not this." Her words weren't loud, but they cut sharp with years of unspoken hurt. Dad looked at her, his mouth opening, then closing. He didn't have an answer. Neither did I. I let go of Sadie's hand and stepped toward the door, needing air. "I need time," I said, my voice steady but distant, like it belonged to someone else. Dad nodded, his gaze still down, and Mom reached out her fingers, brushing my sleeve. "Harper, stay," she said, almost pleading. I shook my head, not meeting her eyes. "I can't," I said. "Not now." Sadie followed me outside, the morning sun too bright for the ache in my chest. We walked to the park across the street, the same one I'd fled to before, its benches empty under the bare trees. She sat beside me, her knees pulled up, her voice quiet. "I didn't know it was this bad," she said. "I thought Dad was just Dad." I nodded, staring at the cracked pavement. I'd thought the same. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from Grandpa. I played it, his voice warm but heavy. "Harper, I'm sorry you're carrying this. Come by when you're ready. We'll talk." I closed my eyes, picturing his weathered hands, the roses he'd been pruning. He didn't know about Greg either. Another layer of betrayal, another secret Dad kept from us all. Sadie shifted her shoulder, brushing mine. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't have an answer, but the question settled like a stone. I stood pacing the grass, the keychain clinking in my pocket. "We keep going," I said, more to myself than her. "I'm not letting this define us." She nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was still processing. I drove to Grandpa's later, the folder still in my bag, the letter I'd written to Dad folded beside it. He was in his kitchen, stirring soup, the smell of thyme filling the room. He didn't ask about Dad, just hugged me, his arms strong despite his age. "You're enough," he said, his voice firm. "House or no house?" I nodded, my eyes stinging, but the hurt lingered, a quiet bruise that wouldn't fade. Sitting at his table, I looked out at the backyard, the roses bare in the morning light. The truth was out, but it hadn't fixed anything. Dad's confession, Mom's shock, Sadie's quiet pain, it all hung over me, heavy and unresolved. I rested my hand on the keychain, its shape familiar now. It wasn't the house, but it was something. A piece of Grandpa's love still mine. And yet the emptiness remained, a hollow space where trust used to be. I left Grandpa's kitchen with the smell of thyme still clinging to my sweater, his words echoing in my mind. "You're enough." The drive back to Columbus was quiet, the radio off, just the hum of tires on asphalt. My apartment greeted me with its familiar clutter books stacked on the counter, a half-dead plant by the window. I set the keychain on my desk, its brass catching the morning light. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like running. I sank into my couch, the cushions sagging under me, and let my eyes wander to the ceiling. The cracks up there used to bother me, a reminder of how small this place was. Now they felt like part of the story, my story. I'd been so angry, so hurt, but sitting here I felt a shift, like a tide pulling back. I wasn't ready to forgive Dad, not yet, but I wasn't drowning anymore. At work the next day, I walked into the community center, the buzz of kids' laughter filling the halls. My desk was a mess of papers, grant proposals I'd been avoiding. I pulled out a notebook, an idea sparking. What if I turned this pain into something useful? I started drafting a program for financial literacy, something to help people avoid the mistakes Dad made. My pen moved fast ideas, spilling out workshops on budgeting, debt management, even talking about shame and secrets. It felt right, like a piece of me was coming back together. During lunch, I stepped outside to the center's garden, a patchy square of herbs and wildflowers the kids planted. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of basil. I sat on a bench watching a bee hover over a bloom. My phone stayed quiet. No texts from Sadie or Mom, and I was okay with that. I needed this space, this moment to breathe. I thought about Grandpa, his hands in the dirt, always building something lasting. Maybe I could do that too. I called Sadie later, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. "Can you meet me at the community center tomorrow?" I asked. She hesitated, then agreed, her tone curious. "What's up?" she said. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Just want you to see something I'm working on." Hanging up, I felt a flicker of hope, not loud but steady. I was starting to see a path not just through the hurt, but beyond it. Back at my desk, I taped a note to my monitor: "Start small, keep going." It wasn't much, but it was mine. The center's director stopped by, glancing at my notebook. "New project?" she asked, her eyes bright. I nodded, explaining the financial literacy idea. She leaned in, interested, and for the first time in days, I felt like I was moving forward, not just reacting. The hurt was still there, but it wasn't all of me anymore. The next morning, Sadie showed up at the community center, her scarf loose around her neck, eyes curious but guarded. I led her to the garden, the air cool with the promise of fall. The wildflowers were fading, but their colors still held stubborn against the chill. I handed her a flyer I'd drafted for the financial literacy program, my handwriting neat on the margins. "This is what I'm building," I said, my voice quiet but sure. "Something to help people start over." Sadie read it, her fingers tracing the words. "This is because of Dad, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, sitting on the bench, the wood creaking under me. "Not just him," I said. "It's for us too, so we don't carry his mistakes." She sat beside me, her shoulder brushing mine, and for a moment we just listened to the wind rustling the leaves. I pulled the keychain from my pocket, its brass warm from my hand. "I used to think this was all I had left of Grandpa's dream," I said, holding it up. "But maybe it's not about the house. It's about what we do with what's left." Sadie's eyes met mine, and she nodded, a small smile breaking through. "You sound like him," she said, and my throat tightened, not with pain but with something softer. Later, I drove to a local community savings group I'd found online, held in a church basement. The room was warm, smelling of coffee and old hymnals. People sat in a circle, sharing stories of debt loss and starting over. A woman named Lena spoke about her own family's secrets, her voice steady but raw. Her story wasn't mine, but it felt close, like a mirror held up to my own hurt. I didn't share yet. Just listened, my hands folded in my lap, the keychain tucked inside. When I got home, I opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden frame I'd bought months ago but never used. I slipped Grandpa's letter inside, careful not to crease it further. His words deserved a place not hidden away, but seen, a reminder of what love could build. I hung it above my desk, the glass catching the evening light. It wasn't the house, but it was enough for now. I sat by my window, the city humming below, and felt the quiet settle in. The anger that had burned so hot was cooling, not gone, but softer, like embers after a fire. I wasn't whole yet, but I was learning how to be. The world outside kept moving, and so would I, one small step at a time, carrying Grandpa's love and my own strength forward. A year had passed since that shattering dinner at Grandpa's, and I stood in his backyard now, the late summer sun warm on my face. His birthday brought us all together again, a small gathering under the oak tree, its branches heavy with green. I carried a tray of lemonade, the glasses clinking softly, and set it on the picnic table. Grandpa was laughing with Sadie, his voice brighter than I'd heard in months. Dad sat nearby, quieter, but his eyes were clearer, less haunted. I'd started a new routine since last fall, waking early to jog along the river path near my apartment. The steady rhythm of my steps, the rush of water beside me, gave me space to think, to let the hurt settle. I wasn't running from it anymore. I was moving through it. At the community center, my financial literacy program had launched a small group at first, but growing. Teaching others to budget to face their debts felt like stitching together the pieces of my own trust. Dad caught my eye as I refilled his glass. "You look good, Harper," he said, his voice tentative but warm. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Thanks," I said, and meant it. Therapy had been his lifeline, and ours too. Family sessions were awkward at first. Voices tight, silences long. But we kept showing up, Mom included, her own hurt softening as we talked. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Sadie handed me a plate of cake, her grin wide. "You're gonna love this," she said, her eyes sparkling. She'd started opening up more, sharing her own fears about family, about losing what we had. We'd grown closer, late-night calls turning into honest talks about dreams and mistakes. I took a bite, the sweetness grounding me, and glanced at Grandpa. He was watching us, his smile soft, like he saw something he'd always hoped for. Later, I slipped away to the porch, the evening air cool against my skin. I leaned against the railing, the wood smooth under my hands, and looked out at the fields stretching into dusk. I'd been saving for a place of my own, a small house I'd found online. Nothing grand, but with a front yard big enough for a garden. I'd shown Grandpa the listing yesterday, and his eyes lit up, a quiet pride in them. It wasn't Cypress Ridge, but it was mine. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a photo of the house, its simple brick facade glowing in the sunlight. I'd been adding to a savings account bit by bit, each deposit a step toward something new. The hurt from Dad's choices hadn't vanished, but it didn't define me anymore. I was building something, not just a home, but a life where I chose what mattered. The stars were starting to show faint against the fading sky, and I breathed deep, feeling steady, almost whole. The next day, I drove to Cypress Ridge one last time. The house stood as it always had, its white paint soft in the morning light, the cypress tree swaying gently. Ruth was in her garden clipping lavender, and she waved me over with a warm smile. I handed her a note I'd written, folded neatly, my words simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for keeping this place alive," I said. She nodded, her eyes kind, and tucked the note into her pocket. I walked the property's edge, my shoes brushing through tall grass, and stopped by the tree. Its bark was rough under my fingers, steady and old. I didn't feel loss anymore, not like before. This house was part of my story, but it wasn't the whole of it. I'd spent so long angry at Dad, at the secrets he kept, but standing here I saw it differently. His mistakes didn't erase his love, just like mine didn't erase who I was becoming. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop, checking my savings account. The number was growing slow but sure, each dollar a choice to build something new. I thought about Lena from the savings group, her story of starting over after her own family's lies. We'd started meeting for coffee, her quiet strength a mirror to my own. Healing wasn't loud or quick. It was these small moments, these choices to keep going, to trust myself again. Dad and I still talked, short calls that grew less strained. He was trying showing up to therapy, being honest in ways he hadn't before. Mom joined us sometimes, her voice steadier now, and Sadie was finding her own way, braver with each conversation. We weren't the family we used to be, but we were something new, pieced together with effort and time. I looked at Grandpa's framed letter on my wall, its words, a quiet guide. I was enough, and I was building my own roots. The lesson wasn't just about forgiving Dad or reclaiming a house. It was about choosing what to carry and what to let go. Secrets can break you, but they don't have to define you. I learned to hold space for the hurt, but also for the hope to build a life not out of what was lost, but out of what I could create. That house on Cypress Ridge was a dream, but so was the one I was saving for the one I'd make my own. What's a secret you've carried, and how did it shape the life you're building now? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey resonated with you, please subscribe, or share it with someone who might need it. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding our own way, one step at a time.